Imagine sitting in a freezing room, staring at a woman who holds absolute power over your future. A woman who smiles when you fail and invents rules just to watch you trip. For 9 long months, my high school English teacher tried to break me. She wanted to prove I was nothing but an arrogant athlete who didn't belong in her precious classroom. But she made one critical mistake. She thought she was untouchable. She forgot that the cleverest traps are the ones built using the enemy's own rules. And on the final day of the year, I handed her a weapon that didn't just ruin her day, it systematically dismantled her entire career. High school is an interesting social experiment. For most kids, it's about figuring out who you are. For me, it was about balancing a tightrope. I was a freshman, a 9th grader enrolled in honors English. I wasn't a bad kid. I loved learning, loved the challenge. In fact, most of my teachers actually liked me. Sure, they'd get frustrated when my teenage lack of effort crept in. But at the end of the day, we had mutual respect, except for her. Let's call her Mrs. Vance. Mrs. Vance was one of those teachers who didn't just teach English. She guarded it like a troll under a bridge. She walked with a rigid, unnatural posture, her sharp eyes constantly scanning the classroom for any sign of stepped-out-of-line behavior. From day one, I could feel her gaze lingering on me. A heavy, cold stare that practically screamed, "I see you, and I don't like you." It didn't take long to figure out why. I was an athlete, not just a casual benchwarmer. Either I played 3 sports: basketball, baseball, cross country. If there was a ball or a running track involved, I was there. Because of that, I missed class a lot. Away games meant early dismissals and long bus rides. But here was the kicker: I wasn't missing class just to shoot hoops. I was also a major part of the academic teams. I competed in high-level math and science competitions. I was on the quiz bowl team. I was literally bringing trophies back to the school's display cases. But to Mrs. Vance, academic achievements didn't matter if they took you away from her lectern. And sports? Sports were an absolute sin. She despised athletes. She viewed them as mindless, privileged brutes who got a free pass through life. Since I was both an athlete and an academic threat, I became her primary target. The psychological warfare started subtly. I began noticing a pattern with our homework. On normal weeks, the workload was manageable. A few chapters of reading, a short response paragraph. Simple. But the moment a long away game appeared on the school calendar, the workload doubled. I remember sitting on a bumpy school bus at 10:30 p.m., the dim overhead yellow light straining my eyes as I tried to read Shakespeare while my teammates slept around me. We had an away game an hour and a half away, and Mrs. Vance had assigned a massive essay prompt due the next morning. Here's the twisted part: she didn't even check homework every day. She was lazy about it. She'd go days, sometimes a week, without looking at a single notebook. But without fail, the morning after a grueling away game, she would walk down the aisles with her grade book open, a triumphant, wicked smirk on her face. She knew the athletes wouldn't have had time to finish it. She was actively setting traps, waiting for our grades to stumble so she could feel vindicated. But it got worse. The real cruelty came when I actually did the work. I pride myself on my writing. I poured my soul into our major essays. I'd turn in papers that were structurally flawless, argued beautifully, and polished to a mirror shine. When the graded papers were handed back, my heart would sink. A big, fat, bleeding red 72 or 81 would be stamped at the top. I'd look at the paper, flipping through the pages, searching for corrections. Nothing. Not a single red mark. No grammar corrections, no structural notes, no explanations. Just a low grade. Meanwhile, the students sitting next to me would get their papers back covered in red ink bleeding from margin to margin with corrections, and their scores would be a 92 or a 95. One afternoon, the frustration boiled over. I waited until the classroom cleared out, my chest tight, holding my pristine, unmarked 70% paper in my hand. I walked up to her desk. "Mrs. Vance," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm confused about my grade. There are no corrections on my essay, but I received a 74. The person next to me had dozens of errors and got an A. Can you explain what I did wrong? She didn't even look up from her grading at first. When she finally did, her eyes were cold, filled with a terrifying level of condescension. You're capable of doing 90% level work, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. But you are only giving me 70% of your ultimate capability. The other students are giving me 90% of their capability. I grade based on effort and potential. I stared at her, dumbfounded. The blood rushed to my ears. So, let me get this straight, I stammered, the sheer injustice of it threatening to make my voice crack. Does that mean my paper can be objectively better than someone else's, but my grade will be 20 points lower just because of your perception of my potential? She looked me dead in the eye, adjusted her glasses, and smiled. Yes, it was a blatant admission of bias. She was moving the goalposts specifically so I could never succeed. And the ultimate proof that she knew I was a brilliant writer? That exact same month, she recommended me for an advanced, college-level writing seminar, a class reserved exclusively for juniors and seniors. She knew I was talented. She just hated that a kid who wore a basketball jersey could write circles around her favorites. As the year wound down into spring, my grade was hovering in the low B range because of her crooked grading system. Then came the extra credit assignment. It was a lifeline, worth a massive chunk of points that could secure my A. The assignment was brutal. We had to attend a local college's live performance of the Greek tragedy Antigone over the weekend. Write a comprehensive to 500-word analysis tying it to our classroom themes, and turn in the physical ticket stub and playbill. The play only ran from Friday night to Sunday afternoon. The paper was due first thing Monday morning. There was absolutely no way to do it early, but I had a massive conflict. That entire Monday, I was scheduled to be away representing our school at the state-level academic competition. This wasn't some optional field trip. You had to place in the top 10 in the entire region just to qualify. It was the biggest academic event of the year. It was an officially sanctioned, fully excused absence. A week before the play, I walked up to her desk. Mrs. Vance, just a reminder that I'll be competing at state this Monday. Since I won't be in class to hand in the Antigone paper, can I bring it to you first thing Tuesday morning? She nodded smoothly. Of course. Just bring it to my room before the first bell on Tuesday. I wanted to be absolutely sure. Over the next week, I asked her 3 more times. Every single time, her answer was the same. Turn it in Tuesday morning. That weekend was a blur of exhausting chaos. My mom, who thankfully worked as a teacher at the exact same school, had to pick me up from an intense sports practice on Friday evening, rush me home to shower, drive me all the way downtown to the college theater, and wait to pick me up 2 hours later. I stayed up half the night on Saturday pouring everything I had into that 250-word monster of a paper. I saved the file, packed my bags, and spent all day Monday competing. I crushed it, taking first place in one category and second in another. Tuesday morning arrived. It was 6:45 a.m. The school was quiet, the hallways cast in long morning shadows. I had basketball workouts at 7 o'clock a.m., so I walked up to her classroom early, proud, holding my completed essay, the ticket stub, and the playbill neatly stapled together. I knocked and walked in. She was sitting at her desk, sipping coffee. Good morning, Mrs. Vance, I said, placing the packet on her desk. Here is the extra credit paper from the weekend. She looked down at the paper, then looked up at me. Her expression was completely blank. I can't accept this. It's late. It was due yesterday. The air left my lungs. What? No, we talked about this 4 times last week. You told me to bring it Tuesday morning because of the state competition. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes gleaming with absolute malice. I don't recall ever saying that. And regardless of what you think you heard, it's late. No exceptions. I felt a wave of hot anger wash over me. I was representing the school. It was an excused absence. That doesn't matter, she said, leaning back in her chair, clearly enjoying the moment. Another student who went to the competition managed to get their paper turned in on Monday. Yeah, because he lives right across the street from the school. I yelled, losing my cool. I live 20 minutes away, I don't drive, and I was on a bus since dawn. You could have sent it with your mother, she countered coldly. She works here, why would I give it to my mom when you explicitly told me 4 times to bring it Tuesday? My voice echoed in the empty room. Look, I wrote it over the weekend. I didn't write it last night. I can prove it. I pulled out my laptop, booted it up, and pulled up the file properties. I pointed at the screen, my finger trembling. Look at the metadata. Last saved. Saturday, 3:42 p.m. I didn't get extra time. I did the work exactly when everyone else did. She didn't even look at the screen. She just waved her hand dismissively. My decision is final. Take your paperwork and leave my room. I stood there, humiliated, defeated, and out $25 for a ticket I couldn't afford to waste. When I told my mom in the car later, she was furious. Not at me, at Mrs. Vance. My mom knew how hard I worked, and she knew exactly how malicious this woman was. But as a fellow teacher, her hands were tied without definitive proof. Mrs. Vance thought she had won. She thought she had completely broken my spirit. A few weeks later, the final week of school arrived. Mrs. Vance prided herself on one specific, legendary fact. In her entire career, not a single student had ever earned an A on her final exam. She boasted about it constantly. She wore it like a badge of honor, proof that she was the truest, most rigorous educator in the district. In reality, she was just a bitter gatekeeper who loaded us up with trick questions and busy work. On the very last regular day of class, before exam week started, she decided to play a little game. She gathered the class, leaned against her desk, and asked a generic philosophical question. What is your biggest wish for the end of the year? The room was quiet. Students mumbled generic answers about summer vacation. I raised my hand, looking her straight in the eye. I wish for an A on your final exam. The classroom went dead silent. Mrs. Vance let out a loud, mocking laugh that cut through the room like glass. Yeah, well, I wish for $1 million and to never have to deal with your attitude again. Neither of us is getting what we want. The entire class laughed. My face burned. But in that exact moment, something shifted inside me. The frustration, the helplessness, the months of unfair grades, it all crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. You want to play games? I thought. Let's play. The day of the final exam arrived. The rules for the final were strict. It was a 100 question multiple choice test, followed by a 5-point bonus question. The bonus question was entirely subjective. What was your favorite part of this class? What did you learn this year? Give your honest feedback. We were given exactly 2 hours to complete it. To prevent distractions, the school rules stated that if you finished early, you couldn't just leave whenever you wanted. You had to wait until exactly the 1-hour mark to hand in your paper and exit. When the timer started, I buried my head in the test. I didn't just take it, I tore through it. All those months of reading, all those advanced writing concepts she threw at me out of spite. I knew them inside out. I flew through the 100 multiple choice questions in exactly 20 minutes. That left me with 40 minutes of pure, uninterrupted time before I was allowed to leave the room. 40 minutes to answer her little 5-point bonus question. I gripped my pen, and I began to write. I didn't just write a feedback response. I wrote a masterpiece of absolute destruction. I started with her question about what I had learned, stating plainly that I wasn't sure I had learned anything at all. Given that she routinely handed back my papers with failing grades and absolutely zero red ink or constructive feedback to help me improve, then I tackled her question about my favorite part of the class. I wrote that my absolute favorite part was the fact that the clock was ticking down, and I would soon never have to endure her toxic, bitter presence ever again. I systematically listed every single instance of her targeted harassment. I wrote about her doubling the homework specifically for athletes. I wrote about the Antigone paper, her lying about the deadline, and her refusal to look at digital metadata proof just to steal my extra credit. I concluded the essay by stating that she was, by an astronomical margin, the worst educator I had ever encountered in my life, and that our school district was actively worse off by allowing her to teach the 9th grade. I poured all the eloquence, structure, and sharp rhetoric she knew I possessed into a devastating, unmitigated takedown of her entire character. The moment the clock hit the 1-hour mark, I stood up. The loud screech of my chair legs drawing back cut through the silent room. Out of 110 students taking the exam across the split rooms, I was the only person to stand up. I marched down the aisle, slammed my exam face down on the proctor's desk, and walked out the door into the sunny, open-air breezeway. Because teachers don't proctor their own exams, Mrs. Vance was roaming the halls. About 20 minutes later, I was sitting on a bench in the breezeway, waiting for my mom to finish proctoring her own session. Suddenly, the heavy fire doors of the main building swung open. It was Mrs. Vance. She was holding my exam packet in her hand. Her face was completely flushed, her chest heaving, and her eyes were literally welling up with tears. She caught sight of me, her hand trembling as she pointed a finger at my face. Principal's office. Now, she choked out, her voice cracking with sheer rage and humiliation. She stormed off toward the main office. As I walked into the waiting room, the school's soccer coach was sitting there doing paperwork. He looked up, saw me, and smirked. "Surprised to see you sent in here," he joked. "Yeah," I smiled back, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "I think I broke the English teacher." A few minutes later, the door flew open. Mrs. Vance marched in, and trailing closely behind her was my mom, whom Mrs. Vance had literally dragged out of her own testing room to witness my execution. We all filed into the principal's office and sat down. What followed was 45 minutes of absolute theatrical comedy. Mrs. Vance was crying, screaming, and literally choking on her tears every 60 seconds. She was hyperventilating, holding my bonus question up like it was a piece of criminal evidence, claiming I had violently assaulted her character. The principal sat there, calmly reading my essay. When he finished, he looked up at me, then looked at my mom, and finally looked at the sobbing Mrs. Vance. For the past 9 months, whenever students complained about her, the administration dismissed it as kids complaining about a tough teacher. But now, sitting across from a student who had just brought home state-level academic trophies, with a teacher mother sitting right next to him, the narrative flipped. Over the course of that meeting, I laid out everything. The homework traps, the unmarked papers, the Antigone betrayal. My mom backed me up on every single word. The principal looked at the crying woman, completely exhausted by her drama. He cleared his throat. "How many points was this bonus question worth?" the principal asked. Mrs. Vance sniffled, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "5 bonus points." The principal closed the file, leaned back in his chair, and sighed. "Then just don't give him the bonus points." Mrs. Vance's jaw dropped. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. When the official state exam scores were posted a week later, the truth came out. On her impossible 100 question exam, I had scored a 98. I only missed 2 questions. If she had given me the bonus points, I would have made a 103. The next highest grade in the entire grade level was an 81. I had completely destroyed her legendary streak, and she couldn't do a single thing about it. She did try to get the last laugh though. Right before final grades were locked, she secretly went into the online portal and dropped one of my assignments from the second week of August by 10 points, dragging my final average down to a 94.4, which was a B under the old system. I couldn't prove it, but honestly, it didn't matter, because the universe has a funny way of balancing the scales. Over the summer, The school district officially switched to a 10-point grading scale, automatically turning my 94.4 into a solid A. Even better, because of the principal's investigation into my claims, the administration forced her to submit her weekly homework logs to the department chair for mandatory approval, and she was forced to accept digital submissions. 2 years later, after dozens of other students found the courage to expose her toxic behavior, she was officially fired. If this story gave you that ultimate sense of poetic justice, smash that like button. Drop a comment down below and tell me, what's the worst experience you've ever had with a bitter teacher or boss, and did karma ever catch up to them? Don't forget to subscribe for more legendary revenge stories just like this one. See you in the next video.